We'll get started here. It's 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock, depending on which time zone you're in. So we're getting started today. Our speaker is Dr. Marisol Quintanilla. Did I say? Okay. And she's from Michigan State, and she's a nematologist. And so she's going to be talking to us about nematodes and row crops. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and I'm sure we'll have time at the end for other questions as well. So go ahead and get started. Start sharing.
All right. I need to share it. Share screen.
The mountains in the background are in Chile, where Marisol is from originally.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's a ski resort above the city where I was born. Maybe I'll speak louder.
Yep, that'll work.
Yeah, I'll speak louder. All right. And if the connection is bad, let me know. So I'll repeat things if things get bad. All right. And you can see there, that's my lab for Michigan State. I'm in the middle, and I'm surrounded by students and technicians. So there's several nematodes that are common in field crops in Michigan and Indiana. We have pretty much the same nematodes or similar ones. And our main objective as a lab is to assist agriculture. We work with 7 commodity groups: soybean, corn, sugar beets, vegetables, ornamentals, and fruits. And so what is a nematode? A nematode, at least in agriculture and in the soil, is a microscopic round worm. You can see a picture of a root lesion nematode right there. Nematodes can be both good or bad, or beneficial or a pest. Plant parasitic nematodes have a stylet, which is a needle in their mouth that is inserted into the plant, and it'll suck out the plant juices. This injures the plant, but also can vector disease or infect the plant, or have it, or as it wounds the plant, also make the plant susceptible to diseases. Beneficial nematodes will eat bacteria or eat other nematodes depending on what they are. So here's my team getting in the truck to go plant a field trial. So let's start with plant parasitic nematodes in corn. Usually when we think of nematode pests, we think of soybean cyst nematode, because soybean cyst nematode is so famous and it's the #1 yield robbing pathogen in the United States. And sorry, I see that somebody's mowing the lawn. I need to close the windows. Reduce the noise. But in corn, there's also nematodes that cause problem. We did a survey in Michigan, and the #1 nematode that is getting yield from corn is stunt nematode. So stunt nematode is the one that has the biggest importance in Michigan. I do not know in Indiana, because I have not surveyed in Indiana, but that's our case. Root lesion nematode is a problem in sun fields, and corn needle nematode is also very serious. When corn needle nematode is in a field, it can have devastating effects. The good thing is that it is relatively rare, but when it is found, it'll cause severe stunting. Next, we're going to move to soybean cyst nematode, because soybean cyst nematode is a very serious pest of soybean. So if you see the picture right here, you will see a little tiny white dot in the root. That is a soybean cyst nematode female. for the sake of comparison, you can see there a nitrogen nodule that is about 10 times larger. So a nitrogen nodule can be 10 times larger than an SCN female, and the SCN female will look like a grain of sand on the root. Here's a close-up picture in a root with the soybean cyst nematode females coming out of the root. They are very big for nematodes in nematode terms, because they are actually filled with eggs, 200, 250 eggs. So these are cysts. These are gravid, or you can say pregnant females full of eggs, enlarged, sedentary. So soybean cyst nematode is considered the most damaging soybean pathogen in North America, and it's number 2 in the world. So this is not a joking matter. This is a very big problem, and it is robbing yield. It is taking money from Michigan growers, from Indiana growers, and from growers, from soybean growers almost everywhere where this nematode is found. So if you can see the cycle right here, if we start from the egg hatches, and then the nematode, the juvenile, penetrates into the root. It finds a feeding site and communicates with the cell. It puts some chemicals into the cell that makes the cell grow enlarged and become multinucleated. It becomes specialized to feed the nematode. In other words, the plant becomes a slave to the nematode and follows the nematode's instruction. So the plant is no longer working for you. You are fertilizing it, you are planting, you're doing all this effort, but it's no longer working for you, it's working for the nematode. So the nematode, the female, becomes enlarged, sedentary. She doesn't need to move all her life because those cells will be very fed. The plant will feed those cells, will feed the nematode, keep it constantly fed. It can't move. It's like gets room service. It can just lay on the couch and get trays of food, like you're in a hotel and you just order food from the phone. Never need to move. Just get room service. So that's what happened. So the nematode, especially the female, becomes obese, so obese that it breaks out of the root, and her back end will stick out of the root, making it possible for the male to mate with her. And then she will lay eggs out in the soil, in the root. And then when she dies, she will die full of eggs, 200, 250 eggs. And in that stage, she'll be like a casket, like a container full of eggs. In that stage, those eggs can remain alive decades, even up to 40 years in the absence of a host. So you can have a field with soybean cyst nematode and not plant soybeans for many years, and those eggs will be waiting for you to plant soybean in order to hatch. Okay. This is another picture of the same cycle, but these are pictures of real nematodes. And you can see they're starting with egg. Those egg hatch, become juveniles. The juveniles find a place to feed on the root. There, they're beginning to get enlarged. You can see a male. The male, after feeding, becomes a long worm that is very mobile, and the female becomes a enlarged cyst, almost looking like a lemon. So you can see there a male and a female right close to each other. Here's a female with her head inside the root and her back end releasing eggs into the soil. And here's a cyst, and you can actually see the eggs through her cuticle. So here you can see some symptoms. So soybean cyst nematode and most nematode problems are not evenly spread out in the field. So they'll be very patchy. So you'll have areas of the field with very high nematode concentrations and areas of the field that are not. This is because of a couple reasons. One is soil. They tend to prefer sandy areas that are well drained, and also because history. Like say your plant was used in a field that was infected with soybean cyst nematode, and then planted a new field that was clean. That first area where you entered would be the area where, that soil from the previous field fell. So that's where they were first inoculated, and they will start growing and multiplying from there. So it's kind of the history of infection, where they were inoculated. So you'll have this areas of high infection and these areas of low infection. So you'll see that the areas where soybean cyst nematode is found, you will see sometimes plants will die. They will be smaller, yellow, and you will see these patchy areas of low plant growth. Here you can see another picture of the white females right there that look like little tiny white grains of sand, and those big circles, those are the nitrogen nodules. So make it easier for you to see. And you can see this with your naked eye, like in August, if you remove roots, with a shovel, so you don't just yank plants out of the soil, because the nematodes will fall off, the soybean cyst nematode will fall off. But if you take it out with the root and gently remove the roots and shake the soil off a little bit, you will be able to see these little white dots in the roots, like in midsummer. You're not gonna see it early spring, but as they grow, and you will see this. So soybean cyst nematode can reproduce very quickly. They put rabbits to shame. They can reproduce really quickly. So if you start with about 100 eggs in the beginning of the spring, you can end up with almost 20,000 eggs. That's a lot of grandchildren. Bob was talking about 4 grandchildren. Imagine in one summer, 20,000 grandchildren. That's a lot. So that is one of the reasons why it's very hard to manage them, because they are able to reproduce. They have 3 generations per summer, and think about every time they multiply, those cysts could have 100 or 150 or even 250 eggs in one cyst. So that can increase quickly. So what are some of the solutions? In the past, one of the best solutions that was found is soybean cyst nematode resistant varieties. And you can see a picture here. This is from the SCN coalition, which I belong to. A susceptible soybean compared to the soybean cyst nematode resistant variety, you can definitely see a difference in plant growth and yield. The problem is that some of these soybean resistant varieties, the resistance is breaking. In other words, nematodes are able to reproduce in the soybean resistant varieties, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more. So just to give you a little bit of historical background, in the 1950s, soybean cyst nematode was introduced in the US and was only in a couple places in the US. There you can see North Carolina and a couple of other spots. And now look at that. It's all over the United States. Pretty much wherever soybean is grown, soybean cyst nematode is there. Do you guys see that map? So it's spread all throughout wherever soybean is grown. And also the bad news, and this is an important graph right here, is that the majority of these locations where soybean cyst nematode is found, soybean cyst nematode is able to reproduce on the soybean resistant variety, soybean cyst nematode resistant variety, P-I-88788. P-I-88788 is a source of resistance that makes it difficult for soybean cyst nematode to reproduce. Unfortunately, it's like nematodes have broken the resistance. It's kind of like weeds. If you spray them with Roundup for 20 years in a row, pretty soon You know, they're not dying with the Roundup, like mare's tail. Well, this is the same thing. We have been planting the same source of resistance, P8788, for about 20 years or more. And what has happened? The nematodes have been able to break the resistance. In Michigan, 94% of samples, of soybean cyst nematode samples, are now able to reproduce on P8788. I guess you guys are doing better. It's about 56%. I mean, in other words, you still have more resistance than us. So P8788 seems to be standing up better in Indiana than in Michigan. I'm not sure what's making the difference, but at least that's what this map is showing. So just gonna go quickly over some of the trials that we are running to control this. One of them is to evaluate rotation, the effect of rotation. In other words, is there some value of planting different sources of resistance compared to planting P8788 back to back? So we analyzed planting P8788 back to back for several years, or rotating Peking with P8788. Peking is a different source of resistance. Commercially, there's two main kinds of resistance right now commercially available, P8788 and Peking. And of course, there's also susceptible varieties. So in the first year, 2017, when we established the trial, we can see that PI there stands for P8788. P is my, what I chose to call Peking, you know, abbreviation for Peking, and then plus or minus a label. You can see that on the first year, the yields were the same. Peking and P8788 varieties, soybean varieties, yielded the same. Now, on the second year, we can see a very big difference. We can see that P8788 rotated with Peking had the highest yield, significantly higher. P8788 back to back, there was a little bit of reduction in yield. Peking back to back, there was a further reduction in yield, and anything that had its S, which is susceptible, was significantly lower. So, and we've repeated this beyond 2018, and what we're finding out is that the best strategy is to rotate sources of resistance. The second best strategy is to use P8788 back to back. Peking seems to be very valuable when rotated with P8788, but it's not good to just plant Peking. Let's say a farmer says, oh, Peking did very well the first year, you know, my yields were good, then it's a different source of resistance, so I'm gonna start planting Peking now from now on. Only that is not a good strategy. It seems like the resistance breaks down faster and nematode can increase further. So it is a good solution only in combination with P8788. Of course, susceptible, you know, you have good, very good reproduction and very high yield losses, very, very good yield losses. This is SCN numbers, and you can see that everything matches here. P8788 with Peking, that we have the highest yields, had the lowest nematode numbers. In other words, the yield losses are being caused by nematode numbers. The lower the SCN numbers, the higher the yields. Anything that was planted susceptible had very high nematode numbers. Peking back to back had higher nematode numbers than P8788 and Peking back to back. In other words, rotating P8788 with Peking sources of resistance is the best strategy for planting, for managing soybean cyst nematode. In 2018, we pretty much saw the same trend. 2019, we saw the same trend. So this is from the SCN Coalition. The recommendations for managing soybean cyst nematode are: one is to collect soil samples, know your numbers, and if you have a clean field, try to keep it clean. In other words, wash your machinery, when you go from an infected field to a clean field, because anything that moves soil moves nematode. Soybean cyst nematode can't fly, can't walk. They don't move very far in their life, only a couple feet. So they're moving with us. They're moving with our machinery. They're moving with whatever moves soil. Grow non-host crops, such as corn, wheat, grains, anything, pretty much almost anything that is not soybean and beans. So rotate soybean and corn, don't grow soybean back to back. Also grow resistant varieties and rotate your sources of resistance. So don't plant always the same source of resistance, but rotate. And we're evaluating cover crops, some manures, and there's possibilities of using some nematicide protectant seed treatments. We have found their effect to be inconsistent, but some are more effective than others. So we've also evaluated compost and manures, and we have found that this is actually with a different nematode, but the principles apply. We have found that layer ash blend, which is a manure combination by Morgan Composting in Michigan, and poultry manure have an impact, can control, in this case, root lesion nematode, but the principles apply. And I'm not gonna give you all the details on that, but about 2 tons per acre is what we're finding that it begins to be effective. All right, and if anybody wants more details, I can give them to them. In soybean cyst nematode, we're finding that poultry manure has the biggest impact on soybean cyst nematode control. And it seems like it promotes hatch because it increases the juveniles but reduces the eggs. So poultry manure seems to be increasing hatch, and this is poultry manure that we're applying in the year of corn. So not when soybeans is growing, but corn is growing. So we're applying the poultry manure when corn is growing, and poultry manure helps corn to grow because it's a fertilizer, and fertilizers don't really help soybean very much. And on that year, when corn is growing, it seems to be making them hatch, and the eggs are reduced, and juveniles are increased, which is a good thing because if the juveniles hatch and it's corn, it's like suicide mission. They try to feed on corn, but they can't reproduce in corn. So hatching when corn is there, not soybean, is a suicide mission. Makes sense because they can't feed in corn. So the effect is mild. It's not going to eliminate them, but there is some effect going on here. So poultry compost is yielding some control. So thank you so much for inviting us to give this talk for Purdue growers. And if you have any questions, you can contact me. My name again is Marisol, and my email marisol@msu.edu. I'm pretty available, and I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding soybean cyst nematode and any other nematodes and field crops. Yeah. Any questions?
So if you have any questions, you can just unmute yourself and ask.
Have you looked at any studies with like rye cover crops? Any impact by having a non-host when the crop's not growing?
For sure. It has oh, you mean like rye in the winter instead of I mean, you grow soybean back to back and rye is being grown as a winter crop, or you're talking about rye as in soybean not growing that year?
Well, in southern Indiana, he just in a real bad cyst nematode field, he grew rye and harvested it and didn't grow any host crop that year, and it's just a dramatic drop in cyst numbers in the field by doing.
For sure. That is growing a non-host, like a small grain, wheat, rye, has a big impact on soybean cyst nematode. You can have big decrease the first year, second year, you know, every year that you move away from soybean, you get a big drop. As time goes on, the drop kind of goes down because whatever cysts you have less, they kind of go into, you know, they're set for the long haul. Whichever ones are left, I can't wait there many years. But every year you have a reduction, with the first year being the biggest reduction. It's been observed that there seems to be a bigger impact on some crops like wheat or rye that might be with corn as a non-host. And people that rotate, let's say they rotate soybean, corn, and then wheat or another crop. In other words, 3 years of rotation is better than 2 years, and 2 years of rotation is better than just soybean alone. And rye is a non-host, and you will see a very big drop. You can also see a very big drop in numbers of soybean cyst nematode with wheat. Even with corn, you will see a big drop because they're non-host. Soybean cyst nematode can't do anything with corn or wheat or rye or any grass or pretty much almost any plant except soybean, legumes, and unfortunately some weeds. There are some weeds like chickweed and a few others. Some of them which are very common in fields that can be alternative hosts. But most crops are non-host. So weed management is important also. So moving away from soybean or rotating with soybeans is rotating with another crop besides soybean. It's an excellent strategy, Bob. Your observation is right about that.
A question on the corn, your list on the corn nematodes. Are those, a lot of those just specific to corn, or they have wider host range?
Okay. That's a good question. Stunt nematode, which is what we found most commonly in Michigan when we did the survey, which is what's causing the biggest yield loss in corn, it has a wide host range, but not that wide. It will not be a problem in soybean. It's more of a problem in grasses. Corn needle nematode, however, is very specific to corn. Probably the name corn needle nematode gives it away. And if corn needle nematode is found in a field, it can be devastating. I mean, you'll have very short, stunted corn, and the roots, when you uproot the corn, you will see very short, stubby roots. You know, like the roots will be like almost like they were cut off. You know, very short, stubby roots. And in part because the nematode feeds on the roots, and the root tips will die, and the corn will be like 1/3 the size, or even more drastic than that. Generally, you'll find that in fields that are sandy, and you will see it'll be very patchy. You'll have this patches, you know, very low corn yields, very short, stunted growth. So it could be devastating, but it's not widespread. You know, it could be devastated for one grower, but it's not going to be devastating for 80% of growers. You know, so that's very specific to corn. Corn does not suffer the yield losses that soybeans that soybean does, in part because soybean cyst nematode is just so effective and so devastating. And corn doesn't have a nematode that is as terrible as soybean cyst nematode. But still, it suffers yield losses. It's just not as dramatic.
So when the manure is applied, when does that stimulate the cyst to release eggs? I mean, is that in the spring of the year?
Yeah, we applied it in the spring. We applied it in the spring right before planting corn. So we applied the manure, and then just a day or so later, we planted the corn, and we took samples. We took soil samples before and after application, and also compared it with a control. An untreated control, no manure versus the manure. And it was a randomized block design, replicated, and we did see a reduction. So, and we did see like an increase of juvenile. I mean, the eggs seemed to hatch. So there was a reduction of eggs and an increase of juvenile, which is good news because those juveniles that hatch, they have nothing to eat. They won't have nothing to eat until next year, and they can't survive like that. They can't, as a juvenile, they need to hatch and eat. So it's kind of a suicide mission hatch. So there is an effect, but it's not like 80% are hatching. We're seeing maybe more. It's more of it's a measured response, but still it is working better than many other strategies. And we are continuing, we are repeating this trial this year. So we should have more data, and we're repeating it so we can have a second year of results.
Well, you noted poultry manure is better than hog manure, for example. Have you tried hog?
We are including hog manure this year. We did not include it last year. There are papers, there are scientific papers, journals, in which there's been information about hog manure in other nematodes, such as root knot nematode, and I believe even in soybean cyst nematode. And hog manure does have an effect. It is effective. So, but we have not done it with hog manure. We are doing it this year with hog manure, but we don't have the results yet because just we're setting it up. So we're comparing now poultry manure with hog manure. We do know, because we did include it, we do know that dairy manure does not have a big effect on soybean cyst nematode, or for that matter, most other plant parasitic nematodes. It needs to be kind of like hot stuff, like strong, like almost higher toxicity. Hog manure, poultry manure have a higher concentration of certain toxic of organic acids, such as butyric acid and acetic acid, that causes mortality and nematodes. There's other manures that are milder, less stinky per se, but they don't have much effect. They don't have as much effect.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I know Bob had asked about cover crops, but what about, like we mentioned, cover crops during the winter? So there's certain species like mustards or stuff like that. Would those types of plants be affected on reducing populations in that?
Well, we have evaluated, and we are doing cover crop host studies on, actually on pots. We're actually evaluating, and most mustard cover crops are either non-host or extremely poor host to soybean cyst nematode. So they would help to control it. So in addition, there's some of them that seem to be better than others in reducing population. And we do have those results. And I would be happy, if you send me an email, I could share some of those results of different varieties from different companies that seem to be working better than others. So far, for soybean cyst nematode, we are not aware of, like you would call it, trap crop. For beet cyst nematode, for sugar beet cyst nematode, there are some mustard varieties that not only reduce populations in the sense of being a non-host, but they are a trap crop. They are doing something really fantastical. You would almost say like magical. When you plant this mustard, it deceives the nematode to think that it's a host, so that those cysts that are set to be surviving there in the soil for 20 years, those cysts hatch, those eggs hatch. And they go and try to feed on that mustard. They go in the roots, and instead of being able to feed, they cannot grow. They start feeding, but they can't set up that special feeding site, so they can't become obese. They can't grow. So that they can't reproduce. So you're actually decreasing that population that's set up for the long haul. So you are decreasing what you would say the cyst bank, like you would say the weed seed bank. You would decrease the nematode bank in the soil. You will start decreasing those numbers that are set for the long haul. That is something that is existent for beet cyst nematode, sugar beet cyst nematode, not yet for soybean cyst nematode. So we are trying to evaluate some of these cover crops to see if we can find something equivalent that would be a trap crop. We haven't gotten there yet, and we haven't found that yet. But that is something that we're trying to evaluate. But most of these cover crops, most radish cover crops, are effective non-hosts. In other words, they're not, or poor hosts. They're not increasing the nematode numbers, and they provide other benefits like they hold the soil, improve, soil health and, drainage and whatever. So many other benefits, holding some nutrients, and they're not increasing nematode numbers. Neither would rye, neither did most cover crops. Of course, if you use a legume cover crop, some legumes are alternative hosts. Most are not very good. Definitely beans, like dry beans. Soybean cyst nematode can reproduce well in dry beans. So those are not, that would not be a good choice. As an alternative crop. So
if you can't find a good Peking number to use, is it better to at least rotate the PI type of soybean you're planting instead of planting the same cultivar of or number of soybean?
Yes, I've heard people saying that, and in part because P-788, the different varieties of P-788 are not made the same, because P-788 source of resistance depends on a gene, and different varieties will have different numbers of this gene, so copies. So it'll be the same gene that codes for resistance will be copied multiple times, like that gene will be copied 7 times or 10 times. I don't remember the number of times, but I'm not an expert in the genetic part of this. But it'll be copied on different number of times, and kind of like the higher the number of copies, the more resistant there is. So not all P-788 varieties have an equal resistance. Some will have different number of copies of the gene. So some might be slightly better than others. So rotating would be, rotating between varieties is still good, but it is still way more effective to rotate to a different source of resistance. or if it's even more effective to rotate with a non-host, in other words, with something that is not soybean.
Mhm. So if someone's having issues with their corn and they got cyst nematodes both, it's important to identify the nematode impacting the corn so you would know what crop to grow, to reduce.
Well, the soybean cyst nematode does not impact the corn. So it does nothing to corn.
I've had growers before in sandy soil saying that there's a nematode that attacked the corn, a nematode that attacked, cyst nematode for
Yeah,
soybeans.
there's nematodes that attack corn for sure, but it's not soybean cyst nematode. There's nematodes that attack corn like stunt, root lesion, cord needle nematode, but it's not soybean cyst nematode. Soybean cyst nematode doesn't have any idea what to do with corn. It can't feed in corn because it can't set that feeding site. So soybean cyst nematode does not have an impact on corn, but there's many other nematodes that have impact on corn, but there is some overlap in the sense that fields that have high numbers of soybean cyst nematode might be very well drained, sandy fields, maybe coarse fields, that are also good places for other nematodes. It seems like heavier clay soils are not as prone to have big nematode infestations. We find that muck soils and sandy soils seem to be better for nematodes, or you have higher numbers, in part because nematodes breathe through their skin, through their cuticle, so they need more air in the soil, and also they need to move in between the soil pores. And if the soil is very dense, or there's not too many pores, and there's not too much air in the soil, in other words, there's anaerobic conditions, nematodes won't do very well. But no, soybean cyst nematode does not affect corn. But there is nematodes that do affect corn. And they might be there too. So if they're sampling, it might be a good idea for them to know the different kind of nematodes they have, and not only get soybean cyst nematode numbers, but get the other nematodes too, for when they send it to a diagnostic lab, get results on other nematodes. Did I answer your question, Bob?
Yeah. It's just frustrating when you got nematodes attacking both of those crops in the same field.
Well, nematodes seem to like certain conditions. There's certain fields that are just very good for nematodes. They like certain soil conditions, and many times sandy fields, they do very well. Also, we're finding that muck fields can have very high numbers of root knot nematode, northern root knot nematode, and very high numbers of soybean cyst nematode, and even other nematodes. So it's thick clay soils, the numbers would be lower. At least that's what we're finding in Michigan.
Okay, thank you.
So if that is all the questions, I think we're gonna end it here. Hold on, let me get the I'll put up our CCA for people with CCAs. Here's the information for getting your credits, and for commercial applicators, email me your number and I will get that entered for you. So our next session is on Thursday with Bill Johnson talking about weeds. So if you have any questions, I'll send out a link to this recording with the link for Thursday's meeting as well. So thanks everyone for coming, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. That was an honor.